What happens when a seasoned television host decides she's had enough of celebrity activism and eco-privilege? You won't believe what unfolds when Sunny Host comes face-to-face with Jason Momoa in what was supposed to be a straightforward discussion about his latest environmental documentary. The tension that erupted on last night's show has everyone talking, and the explosive confrontation that followed will leave you speechless. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two powerhouses clash in the most heated exchange we've seen all year. The atmosphere in the studio was electric from the moment Jason Momoa walked onto the set. Sunny Host, known for her sharp wit and unwillingness to back down from tough conversations, had clearly done her homework. As the actor settled into his chair, running a hand through his famously long hair with a relaxed gesture viewers have come to recognize, there was an unmistakable tension crackling in the air. The production team had briefed everyone that this would focus on Momoa's recent ocean conservancy advocacy and his work with sustainable brands. But Sunny had other plans brewing beneath her professional smile. "Jason, thank you for joining us tonight," Sunny began, her voice warm, but carrying an undertone that suggested this wouldn't be the typical celebrity softball interview. "I have to say, it's inspiring to have someone here who's spoken so much about passion and commitment to the planet, especially given some of the recent brand partnerships that have come to light." Momoa's posture shifted slightly, his easygoing smile faltering for just a moment. "Well, Sunny, I appreciate being here. I think it's important to have these conversations, especially about the health of our oceans and the work we're doing to create a better future." But Sunny wasn't letting him off that easily. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with the precision of a prosecutor who'd found a crack in the defense. "That's interesting that you mentioned a better future, because I think that's exactly what we need to talk about tonight. You've built a brand around being the guardian of the seas, the one who chose activism over apathy. But I have to ask, at what cost to the message?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Momoa's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but Sunny caught it. She'd been doing this long enough to read the micro-expressions that revealed when someone was about to get defensive. "I'm not sure I follow your question," Momoa replied, his laid-back accent seeming to sharpen with tension. "Everything I've done has been about using my platform to protect the Earth." Sunny let out a small laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Your platform? Let's talk about that platform, because I've been watching your trajectory very carefully, and I have to say some of the patterns I'm seeing are deeply troubling." The studio audience, which had been murmuring with excitement moments before, fell into an expectant silence. Even the camera operators seemed to sense that something significant was about to unfold. Sunny had that look, the same expression she wore when she was about to deliver a legal argument that would dismantle her opponent piece by piece. "You see, Jason, you've positioned yourself as this champion of the environment, this advocate for sustainability. But every time you claim to want to save the planet, you sign another multi-million-dollar deal with a corporation with a massive carbon footprint. Every time you talk about reducing plastic, you promote a product that contributes to global consumption." Momoa's hands, which had been resting casually on the armrests of his chair, now gripped them tightly. "I think that's a very unfair characterization of what I've been trying to do. I've been trying to work within the system to create change." "Work within the system?" Sunny's voice rose slightly, and there was no mistaking the skepticism dripping from every word. "Or profit from it in a different direction? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've taken the same playbook that you claim to despise, using greenwashing, playing the passionate hero, and profiting from a global crisis, and just pointed it in a different direction." The actor's face flushed slightly, a telltale sign that Sunny's words were hitting their mark. "I think you're misunderstanding the situation entirely. I've been trying to heal our planet, to inspire people to become a better person and father." "At whose expense?" Sunny shot back without missing a beat. "Because every commercial you film, every brand you endorse, every blockbuster movie you participate in seems to come at the expense of the very message you claim to champion. And now you want to lecture the world about sustainability?" The tension in the room was becoming palpable. Camera operators adjusted their positions to capture every nuance of the exchange, while the studio audience sat transfixed by the verbal sparring match unfolding before them. This was clearly not going according to anyone's script, least of all Momoa's. "I've never claimed to be perfect," Jason said, his voice taking on a defensive edge that sharp-eared viewers would immediately recognize. "But I've been honest about the challenges and my journey." Sunny leaned back in her chair, a predatory smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Honest? That's the word you want to use? Because I've been doing my research, and there are some very interesting inconsistencies between the eco-warrior you portray and the A-list lifestyle you live." The actor's media training was clearly kicking in as he tried to maintain his composure, but cracks were beginning to show. "I think context is important in any conversation about complex global issues and personal responsibility." "Context," Sunny repeated, her tone making it clear she found the word insufficient. "Let's talk about context then. The context of a man who flies on private jets to climate conferences, who is the face of gas-guzzling trucks, and who now makes millions by telling everyone else to reduce their consumption." The studio fell into an almost uncomfortable silence as those words landed. Momoa's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, anger, calculation, as he processed what had just been said and formulated his response. But Sunny wasn't finished. "And the most troubling part," she continued, her voice gaining momentum like a prosecuting attorney building toward her closing argument, "is that you've wrapped this entire enterprise in the language of social justice and environmentalism, as if profiting from a brand that pollutes somehow becomes noble when you donate a portion of the proceeds to an ocean charity." Momoa's carefully maintained composure was beginning to crack in earnest now. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried a new edge of irritation. "I think you're deliberately mischaracterizing my motivations and the work that I'm doing." But Sunny was just getting started, and as she prepared to deliver her next verbal assault, it became clear that this confrontation was about to escalate far beyond what anyone in that studio could have anticipated. "Let me ask you something directly, Jason," Sunny said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "When you decided to sign that deal with the car company, when you chose to be the face of that lifestyle brand, did you ever stop to consider the collateral damage to your own message? Did you ever think about the people who look up to you and see a contradiction?" Jason's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "I think everyone has the right to make a living, Sunny, and I think it's pretty rich coming from someone who makes a living dissecting other people's choices on television." The audience drew in a collective breath. This was the moment when professional courtesy died and personal animosity took over. Sunny's smile turned razor sharp. "That's exactly the response I expected," she said, nodding as if Jason had just proven her point. "Deflection? Attack the messenger when you can't defend the message. It's the same playbook every celebrity activist uses when they're called out on their behavior." "Activist?" Jason's voice rose for the first time, his carefully maintained composure finally beginning to crack. "You want to talk about activists? You sit here in your air-conditioned studio, judging people you've never met, making assumptions about situations you know nothing about." Sunny leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. "I know what I see, Jason. I see a pattern of behavior that's deeply concerning. You claim to want to save the earth while simultaneously selling products that harm it. You talk about changing the system while perpetuating the exact same consumer culture you claim to despise." "You don't know what you're talking about," Momoa shot back, his voice growing agitated. "You have no idea what it's like to navigate this industry, to try and use this massive machine for something good." "And there it is," Sunny said, triumph evident in her voice. "The 'it's complicated' card right on schedule. Because whenever you're confronted with the consequences of your choice, it's always someone else's fault, isn't it? It's the industry's fault. It's the system's fault. It's the fans' fault for not understanding. Never your fault." The studio was electric with tension now. Production assistants were frantically whispering into their headsets, unsure whether to intervene or let this combustible situation continue. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every micro-expression, every flash of anger, every moment of this rapidly deteriorating interview. "I've taken responsibility for my choices," Jason said through gritted teeth, "but I won't sit here and be lectured by someone who's never walked in my shoes." Sunny laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "Walked in your shoes? You mean the custom designer boots that were handed to you at a photo shoot? You want to talk about walking in shoes? Let's talk about the people in coastal communities whose lives are impacted by climate change while you're out there selling a fantasy of rugged individualism." Jason's face went pale, then flushed red. "How dare you twist my work like that? That's completely out of line." "Out of line?" Sunny's voice rose to match his. "You know what's out of line? Profiting from an image of environmental purity while your lifestyle directly contradicts it. You know what's out of line? Using your connection to indigenous cultures as emotional leverage every time someone questions your motives." The mention of his heritage was clearly the wrong button to push. Jason shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the studio floor with a harsh sound that echoed through the suddenly silent space. "Don't you dare," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare bring my culture into this." But Sunny wasn't backing down. She remained seated, looking up at him with unflinching determination. "Why not? You bring it into everything else, every interview, every speech, every justification for your brand. My connection to the land, my ancestral roots. You've turned your heritage into a marketing tool." "That's enough," Jason said, his hands visibly shaking with rage. "I came here in good faith to talk about important issues, and you've turned this into a character assassination." "Good faith?" Sunny stood up now, meeting him at eye level. "Good faith would have been being honest about your motivations from the beginning. Good faith would have been acknowledging the contradictions instead of constantly playing the passionate hero. Good faith would have been having this conversation without your PR team pre-approving every topic." "My PR team didn't approve anything," Jason snapped. "And if they had, they would have warned me about walking into an ambush." Sunny's eyes lit up with vindication. "An ambush? Is that what we're calling accountability now? Because from where I stand, this is the first time someone has asked you real questions instead of lobbing you softballs and letting you control the narrative." The confrontation had reached a crescendo that nobody in the studio could have predicted. Two strong-willed personalities, each convinced of their own righteousness, facing off in a battle that had transcended the boundaries of a typical interview. The air itself seemed to crackle with animosity. "You know what your problem is, Sunny," Jason said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You hide behind the pretense of journalism to justify your cruelty. You tear people down and call it holding them accountable. And you know what your problem is?" Sunny fired back without hesitation. "You've never been held truly accountable for the brand you sell, so the moment someone asks you hard questions, you fall apart and start throwing accusations." The studio audience was watching this exchange like spectators at a tennis match, heads turning back and forth between the two combatants. Some looked uncomfortable, others appeared riveted by the raw emotion on display. This was television gold, even if it was rapidly spiraling out of control. "I've been held accountable," Jason insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "I've acknowledged the complexities. I've worked to make a difference." "Have you?" Sunny challenged. "Or have you just found new ways to monetize your image while avoiding any real consequences for your lifestyle? Because from where I sit, accountability looks different than million-dollar endorsement deals and blockbuster film contracts." Jason's jaw worked silently for a moment, as if he were trying to formulate a response that wouldn't make things worse. But the damage was already done. The mask had slipped, and everyone in that studio could see the anger, the defensiveness, and the frustration that he'd been working so hard to keep hidden. "This interview is over," he finally said, though he made no move toward the exit. "Is it?" Sunny asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because we still have 50 minutes left, and I have a lot more questions about the inconsistencies in your various public statements about sustainability." The challenge hung in the air between them, and it was clear that Jason was at a crossroads. He could walk away and look like he was running from the confrontation, or he could stay and risk further damage to his carefully cultivated image. Either way, Sunny had him exactly where she wanted him, and everyone in that studio could sense that the worst was yet to come. Jason's decision came swift and decisive. Instead of retreating, he stepped closer to Sunny's desk, his eyes blazing with a fury that had been building throughout the entire exchange. "You want to talk about accountability," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Let's talk about your accountability, Sunny. Let's talk about how you've built your career on tearing down people who are actually trying to do something. Let's talk about the cynicism you've destroyed with your so-called journalism." Sunny didn't flinch. If anything, she seemed energized by his aggression. "Is that a threat, Jason? Because if it is, you're proving my point beautifully. The moment someone challenges you, you resort to intimidation tactics." "It's not a threat," Jason snapped. "It's an observation. You sit here pretending to be some kind of moral authority, but you're nothing more than a glorified cynic with a television show." The insult landed like a physical blow. Sunny's eyes flashed dangerously, and when she spoke, her voice carried the full weight of her legal training and years of experience dealing with hostile witnesses. "A cynic?" she repeated, her tone deadly calm. "That's rich, coming from someone whose entire public persona has been built on selling an illusion. The illusion of the eco-warrior. The illusion of the man of the people. The illusion of an authentic life that's anything but. You've turned saving the planet into a cottage industry." Jason's composure finally shattered completely. "At least I'm trying to build something, instead of just picking apart other people's lives for entertainment." "Trying to build something?" Sunny's voice rose to match his intensity. "Which version? The version where you're saving the oceans? The version in your truck commercials? The version you're peddling now? Because they're all different, Jason, and that's the problem. You can't keep your brand message straight." "I've never lied." "Unlied," Jason protested, but even as the words left his mouth, they sounded hollow and unconvincing. Sunny pounced on the weakness like a predator, sensing wounded prey. "Never lied? What about the story you told about your commitment to sustainable living? What about the claims you made about the brands you partner with? What about the timeline of events you've presented regarding your awakening as an activist? Because I've done my homework, Jason, and none of it adds up." The studio had become a pressure cooker of tension. Camera operators zoomed in to capture every facial expression, every gesture, every sign of the emotional breakdown that seemed inevitable. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what was clearly the most explosive interview confrontation in recent memory. Jason's hands were shaking now. Whether from rage or panic, it was impossible to tell. "You don't know what you're talking about. You weren't there. You don't know what really happened." "Then tell me," Sunny challenged, leaning forward like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "Tell me the truth, not the sanitized PR-approved version, not the hero narrative you've been selling. Tell me what really happened and why you felt the need to compromise your message every time you tell it." "I don't owe you anything," Jason said, his voice breaking slightly. "I don't owe you explanations or justifications or anything else." "You're right," Sunny agreed, nodding slowly. "You don't owe me anything, but you owe something to all the people who've supported you, who've believed in your cause, who've defended you when others questioned your methods. Don't you think they deserve the truth?" For a moment, something flickered across Jason's face. Vulnerability, perhaps, or recognition. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a mask of cold fury. "The truth," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You want the truth? The truth is that people like you will never be satisfied. No matter what I do, no matter how much good I try to create, there will always be someone like you waiting to tear me down for their own benefit." Sunny stood up slowly, her movement deliberate and controlled. "People like me? You mean people who ask hard questions? People who don't swoon because you were born with charisma? People who expect your actions to match your words? People who profit from other people's pain?" Jason shot back. "People who hide behind righteousness while destroying lives for ratings." The accusation hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down in challenge. Sunny's response was swift and devastating. "You want to talk about profiting from pain? You've made millions selling an image of a dying planet. You've turned climate change, ocean pollution, and indigenous struggles into content for your various projects. And you have the audacity to lecture me about ethics." Jason's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, rage, and finally something that looked almost like defeat. But instead of backing down, he seemed to find a reservoir of anger that pushed him past any remaining boundaries of civility. "At least I'm honest about who I am," he said, his voice rising to nearly a shout. "I don't pretend to be some kind of journalistic crusader while ambushing people on live television." "Honest?" Sunny's laugh was harsh and mocking. "You wouldn't know honesty if it bit you on your perfectly branded, eco-friendly behind. You've been selling this image for so long that I don't think you even remember what the truth looks like anymore." That was the final straw. Jason's face contorted with rage, and he took a step towards Sunny's desk that made several security personnel visibly shift in their positions. "How dare you," he said, his voice shaking with fury. "How dare you sit there and question my integrity when you spent this entire interview trying to destroy me for ratings?" "I didn't have to try to destroy you," Sunny replied, her voice steady despite the intensity of the moment. "You've done that perfectly well yourself. I just ask questions. If the answers make you look bad, that's not my fault. That's yours." Jason stared at her for a long moment, his chest rising and falling rapidly. The studio was so quiet that the hum of the cameras was audible. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Finally, he straightened his shirt with sharp, angry movements. His voice, when he spoke, was cold and controlled, but everyone could hear the barely contained fury underneath. "This has been the most unprofessional, biased, and frankly disgusting interview I've ever experienced," he said, his words clipped and precise. "You should be ashamed of yourself, Sunny. This isn't journalism. It's a hatchet job." Sunny remained standing behind her desk, unmoved by his words. "The only thing I'm ashamed of is that it took this long for someone to ask you these questions." Jason's jaw worked silently for a moment, as if he were trying to formulate one final devastating comeback, but instead he simply shook his head in apparent disgust. "I'm done," he said, reaching up to remove his microphone with jerky, agitated movements. "This is exactly the kind of toxic cynicism that I fight against, and I refuse to subject myself to it for one more second." He placed the microphone down on his chair with a firm thud that echoed through the studio speakers. Without another word, he turned and began striding toward the exit, his movements sharp and angry. "Jason, we still have 8 minutes left," Sunny called after him, but her tone suggested she wasn't particularly disappointed by his departure. Momoa paused at the edge of the set, turning back one final time. "8 minutes too many," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent studio. "Good luck with your career, Sunny. I hope destroying people on television is everything you thought it would be." With that, he disappeared into the wings, leaving behind a studio full of stunned faces and an audience that seemed uncertain whether to applaud or sit in shocked silence. Sunny remained standing at her desk, watching his retreat with what could only be described as satisfaction. "Well," she said, turning back to face the cameras with a slight smile, "I think that tells us everything we need to know about celebrity activism's commitment to accountability and honest conversation." We'll be right back after this break. As the cameras cut away and the studio lights dimmed, the magnitude of what had just unfolded began to sink in. In less than 30 minutes, one of the most explosive confrontations in television history had played out in real time, leaving everyone involved forever changed by the brutal honesty of what had been revealed.